Hello and welcome to Series 2 of Let's Go Further, a podcast from the Skills and Education Group that challenges the way we think about skills and education. I'm Joe McLoughlin, Foundation Manager at the group, and in this series I'm speaking to people from inside and outside the education sector about equity, diversity and inclusion. And joining me is television, radio personality and equity, diversity and inclusion champion Will Njobvu. So Will, I'd like to begin with a broad question and ask a little bit about your experience of school and college growing up. What was that like?
Do you know what? I do miss school, but it's a bittersweet feeling sometimes. I mean, well, obviously I miss the days when I kind of just, I went into school, did nothing and kind of played with my friends, but it was a good experience for me. Obviously, I went to school in North London, then went to college in North London again in Holloway, then went to uni in Leicester. And I just think for me, like every single step of my educational years, I just learned something new about myself and my life, really, to be honest. I think primary school and secondary school for me were probably some of the best and most challenging years of my life, I'd say, because you're learning so much about yourself. You're around so many other young people who are different to you. You're having to find out and learn about your identity while embracing your identity around a lot of other children who are different to you. So yeah, it had its pros and its cons, but I have no regrets, and I definitely feel like it made me a better person.
Was there a great experience of kind of racism and discrimination in that period?
Yeah, I'd say that when I was in school, 100%. And that's because when you're that age, when you are, I don't know, 9, 10, the kids around you are a bit more brutal, if I'm to be honest with you. They're not thinking about what they're saying. Some of these kids are coming from homes where their parents might be racist, their grandparents might be racist, and they might pick up on certain things and bring that into the classroom. So yeah, I definitely dealt with that in my school years. And it wasn't the easiest really to deal with. But for me, I just kind of tried to embrace who I was at every given opportunity. Obviously, I was that guy in school who would always tell the teacher, I'd always tell my mum what was going on and always tell my brothers what was going on. But actually, that was the best thing for me, because whenever I did experience racism at school and I told a teacher, or I told my family or my loved ones, they were able to tell me what was going on and give me that education that actually some people are ignorant in this world. And it's a weird thing, because I remember my brother telling me continuously, ignore them, you are better than this. But at the same time, this exists in life, sadly.
So as well as just providing that kind of listening post then and talking to teachers, what did the schools or colleges do to address the issues? Was there anything kind of a more supportive or a bigger level?
I actually remember a teacher I had in business studies when I was in secondary school called Mr. Jones. And he was such a role model to me. He's a Black teacher. And I remember actually every single year having almost like a kind of like a buddy for students from ethnic minority backgrounds you can go and speak to and stuff like that. So anytime that I did experience anything, I would go to Mr. Jones and just say, look, this has happened. What do you think? And he would kind of act accordingly. And I think that's just important to have in every single school, really. Well, look, I just think in general, across the board, it's important to have more Black teachers, more teachers of color, so that students, back then, like myself, or even now, do feel comfortable enough to speak out and say, hey, that's just happened. Who do I talk to about this? Because if I didn't have Mr. Jones back then, who would I have spoken to about that? Would I have just gone home and cried to my family? Or would I have been able to have dealt with it in school? And it was dealt with in school. So I just think that in general, there should be more diversity in schools overall, as that will help kids and students feel like they can speak out.
It gives you, I suppose, a more comfortable way of having an uncomfortable conversation, right?
Exactly. I think it's sad, actually, if I'm to be honest with you. It's very sad at that age, children have to have those conversations. I sometimes look back at it and just wish that at that age, I wish I was a bit more naive to racism, to homophobia. I just wish that I'd never experienced that. But unfortunately, I did. And I know that in this day and age, children will still be dealing with that stuff.
So in other interviews and discussions, I've seen you talk about how your experience of racism nowadays is a different kind of racism to maybe the racism of years ago. And I think one of the phrases you used was it's a bit more subtle, it's a bit more disguised. And I'm just curious as to what you meant by that.
you're right. I did say that, and I do agree with that. I still stand by those comments. I just think that at the moment, the racism now is a bit more subtle because there are more conversations about racism, and it's clearly not a good thing in society. The way people are being racist are just a bit more like subtle and under the rug. Microaggressions, I think, is something that people are dishing out left, right, and center, because when you experience microaggressions, it's almost quite hard to track sometimes. Like if I experience a microaggression at work, because someone's not outright saying the N-word to you, it's like, it's kind of hard to track and report that person. So a lot of people are getting away with it. I mean, one microaggression I've received throughout my whole life, and I get sometimes, I've had it at work, even up to this day, people could be like to me, oh, well, you're really well spoken for, you're just really well spoken. And actually, someone has said to me, you're well spoken for a Black person. And my question is, well, why wouldn't I be well spoken? I mean, I've grown up in London. Why wouldn't I be? Why wouldn't I be just as well spoken as you? People are still serving out their views in other ways. And it's like, for example, if I reported that now, it wouldn't be taken as serious because they're like, well, no one said the N-word, so it can't be racism. Oh, they're just being childish. They're just being ignorant. So I just think that we are in this day and age now where the racist people are getting a bit smart and they're doing it in other ways.
Does that make it more dangerous then? In the sense that if you can see it and it's obvious, you at least know it's there and you know what it is. But if it's kind of more day to day and more subtle, does that make it more dangerous in the longer term, do you think?
It definitely makes it more dangerous because sometimes you question yourself. Like when someone does something like, they might just rub my hair a bit and like, oh, your hair is like a monkey, or when someone says that, you're well spoken for a Black person, you do think to yourself, am I overthinking it? Is it just me? Or is this actually racism? Or is it not? Like it actually plays around with your mind. So it's more dangerous because sometimes you even question if you should call it out, because it's not the stereotypical idea of what racism, of what society believes racism to be. And that's actually harder to tackle, and that's actually harder to crack down on. And I think bringing it back to education, if something like this was to happen in school, and let's just say, we're in an educational body where there aren't any Black teachers, that would completely be swept under the rug because not every single person who is not Black will understand the effects of these microaggressions. Some of them may not understand that actually this could be racism, because to their, in a lot of people's minds, they're like, well, if you're not saying the N-word, then you're clear. So actually, this is more dangerous. It's just harder to detect.
It reminds me of the recent argument with Buckingham Palace around the questions of where are you from, and is where are you from an appropriate question, or at what point does it become a loaded question, or a kind of an aggressive question?
Imagine if that was not called out. Like that could have happened so many times at Buckingham Palace, but this is the first time where it's been called out and people are like, oh gosh, right, you can't actually say that. Or people are like, oh right, yeah, I won't say that. It's just, this stuff happens under the radar so much. And I just think, as I say, if when we start calling this stuff out, then that's when we start to tackle it.
From that basis then of your personal experience, is that where your passion for a more kind of equal, kind of diverse and inclusive world comes from? Kind of, is that part of it, what drives you, in that you don't want other children to go through a version of what you went through?
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, this is why I'm always speaking out about more representation, because the more representation there is in schools and educational bodies, the less this stuff will happen. Like I experienced a lot of racism when I was in school. I'm not even necessarily just on the playground, walking home. When you're growing up, sometimes you might hang out with friends by the shopping center, even there. And it's just, it has such a long-lasting effect on your life and the way you view yourself. Actually, sometimes the way you view your culture and your skin color, because you ask yourself, well, if I'm dealing with this at such a young age, how will I survive when I'm older? And does it mean that if people are saying these racist comments to me, does that mean that there's something wrong with being Black, when actually there isn't? And, back to what I said before about, I just sometimes wish that in my experience, I was just a bit more naive to this, or I wish I didn't ever have to go through it. So I guess a more diverse educational system will mean that less young Black children will have to go through that.
So I've also kind of, in getting ready for today, I've read a number of interviews and kind of watched some TikTok videos where you talk openly about being yourself. And I've read that despite getting death threats and having a kind of a backlash against your kind of identity, you're very, very happy and you're very, very positive in that. In the face of that hostility and that ignorance, where do you get that resilience from? Where's that strength of character come from?
I think the resilience comes from experience. Me speaking about that on TikTok and being so open about this stuff in the press, it all comes from experience. It all comes from once upon a time being unable to speak about it. It all comes from being bullied once in my life and, not feeling supported and not feeling comfortable with who I was. But it took me years of training my mind to understand that there's nothing wrong with my race or my sexuality, to eventually then moving on to really just enjoying my life and not caring what people think. I've had friends just abandon me and leave me because of my sexuality. Sometimes even family members have not been supportive of me. But at the end of the day, this is my life. I've had to take a tough stand in my life to be me. I think it's very brave for anybody who is not in the societal norm, whether you're gay or whether you're trans, to put your foot down and say, this is who I am. I don't care if you're a friend. I don't care if you're a family member. If you don't support me, you will never see me again, or you'll never have access to me or in the same way again. I think that's a very bold thing to do, because growing up, a lot of us want to be accepted. A lot of us want to have all the friends in the world, and a lot of us want to have all the love in the world and all the family in the world. But when you have to take a stand and put yourself first for once and put your identity first, you understand that you could risk losing everything. And when I decided to start being comfortable and speaking out about my identity and owning it, it was a very scary period, a very, very, very scary period, because when I was younger and in the closet and in school, I remember saying to myself, well, I'm never going to have to really tell anyone until I'm an adult and guess, and here we are. I kept on postponing it. Oh, well, come on, I'm like 14. I'm like 15 now. It's not important. I'm like 17 now. It's not important. I'm like, oh, no, now here we are in my late 20s. And at a stage in my life where, I'm on TV, I'm on the radio, I'm on social media, I'm very much out there. People can now see who I am without me even saying it. So I got to a point where I said to myself, well, I'm not going to lie to myself and I'm not going to lie to people. I made the decision last year. It was a conscious decision, a very bold decision, to put my foot down and live my life in truth and risk losing everything. And that was the best decision I could have ever made in my whole entire life. So when you ask me, how did you get that resilience of like moving past the death threats and everything? It's years. Like the resilience started from when I was in primary school up till secondary, to college, to uni. It's years. And some people look at me and, I remember when I did make that TikTok video last year, quite a few people I know who are gay and who are not out there said to me, oh gosh, like, why did you do that? How did you do that? Are you okay? And I said, look, when your time comes, it will come. Some people never actually need to do that. It was something that I thought was important to do. I'm not going to say, I don't know, I think there's this pressure of people saying, oh, you're an activist. Or you that. Listen, my definition of activism is just living in your truth. I'm not necessarily walking on the streets of placards and, chanting things, but my definition of activism in this world is living your truth authentically, being yourself, and not giving a beep who's watching, and not caring what people think, because that in itself inspires people. That's kind of why I do this as well, because, I remember being young and not seeing many characters like me on TV or on radio and whatever. So now I just want to be that person for people, really. I'm just myself. My activism, I guess, is through just me being me.
What do you think educators can do then in kind of helping young people navigate those identities so that they're not having to do what you did at, 14, 15, 16, kind of almost putting themselves on hold for another year?
Well, I put my life on hold for nearly 2 decades. I wasn't able to, I had a whole fake life for like 2 decades, right? I wasn't able to have the casual chat with friends at school, and they're like, oh, hey, I fancy this person, or hey, I fancy that. And when I look back at that, I just feel heartbroken. I feel like I missed out a whole heap of my life, which I kind of wish I lived openly. Look, I think it's such a complex thing. I think educators certainly have a role, but this is a society issue. I think a lot of people think that, oh, because there's Pride Month every year and because there's rainbow flags and on social media, people think that we're in this day and age where actually, you can just say you're gay and it's fine. In this day and age, people are still have an issue with it. in society, it's still very much a problem. I wonder how children in schools are dealing with it now. But I think to give children who are going through what I went through a bit more of a safe space is by giving them maybe like I said, a buddy or a mentor or like a therapist or that comes in. I was speaking about this the other day where like when I was in school, but the school had hired this man to come in. They had like a room and you'd book in an appointment with him, like a 1 hour session a week or something, where you just talk to him about how you're feeling, things happening in the playground. And because he was so detached from my school life and my friends and the dramas that were happening on the playground, or even the dramas that were happening with the teachers, and because he was so detached from everything in school, I was really able to openly speak about just everything that I was going through. So I guess for children who were just simply going through what I was going through, they could speak to someone like that and just be open and just say how they're feeling without feeling like they're being judged. I think that's just such an important tool to have, really, in every single school. I mean, they might have it now, but it's an important thing to have.
Just sort of changing topics for a little bit. You're currently working as a presenter on Capital. You're hosting and editing your own podcast series, and you're appearing across ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5 in sort of various roles. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit of how you got there and kind of the role that education played in your career trajectory.
Oh, education was everything, really. I used to hang around with like the goth kids in school, and sometimes we just used to think we were like untouchable. And I used to be in a rock band in school as well. So like sometimes I would just be bunking. But then to be fair, in my last years of school, I really did like buckle up, kind of focus on my books. And yeah, I left with six or seven GCSEs. And then I went to college to study business. And I studied business, not really because I wanted to, but because my family were like, well, you know, you need to study business. That's like the right thing to do. And I was like, all right. So some of the skills I learned college really, really helped me. But anyways, I then went to do media and journalism in university. And I think that's what really helped me carve my career. Obviously, I think there's a whole debate around, you know, should you go to uni? Should you get an apprenticeship? You know, uni is not, obviously, it's not the only direction that people should take. Some people could do apprenticeships. I'm sure I would have had a fulfilling career by going into an apprenticeship as well. But for me, university is what worked because, you know, I moved away. I think I was still quite immature. So I was still kind of like enjoying life, partying and whatever. But I still knew I wanted to work I knew I wanted to work and study media, but I didn't know what it was I wanted to do. So I went to see the careers advisor. He said, well, you could do this, you could do PR, you can do this. And I was like, I was never really sure, but I kept on going back to her like, look, can you just tell me what it is that I need to do? And she was like, I don't know, you need to figure it out. But look, here's the student radio station, you know, get involved in that and see whether you like it. And actually that taught me how much I like delivering information via broadcast. It taught me that I loved communicating to the masses. It was just like a big domino effect.
Because when you talk about that as a domino effect now, and I know in retrospect, when you look back, everyone does it. Everything seems neat and tidy, right? Everything kind of adds and builds and builds. I was just curious, kind of, about the role, if any, you think race played in your kind of career trajectory. Were there moments where you noticed it really helping you? Were there moments where you noticed it really kind of hindering you and kind of leading to some negative responses? And if there were, kind of, what could have been better about those? What might have been done differently, do you think, by the people involved?
Do you know what? I just think that there's a reality in media back then and even now where there's been an issue with diversity in journalism, with you know, on-screen talent. And I just think that, especially when I was coming up, well, it was only a couple of years ago, wasn't that? Literally like 3 years ago. When I was coming up, there certainly wasn't as much diversity on screen now as there was back then. So I just think that people were looking at me like, what are you trying to do here? Are you sure you're going to make it? And I definitely got that vibe. I mean, you know, there were certain producers who said that to me and said, oh, you know, would you maybe just think about working maybe behind the scenes, or maybe just, you know, basically like directing me towards another path, because I'm sure they even felt like, we never really see people like you doing this. So I definitely felt discouraged. And I think you're correct. And I'm happy you pulled me up on that, actually, because when you look back on this stuff and you think, oh, well, I did this, I did this, I did this, I think it's very easy for you to just say, well, for me to just say, yeah, it was just a big domino effect. And you're right, it probably wasn't. You know, I definitely had my stumbling blocks from like, all right, where I was working in newsrooms where I was the only Black person, where I was working at TV stations where I was the only Black person, where I was working at media organizations where, in fact, not just the only Black person, I was the only person of color, of any sort of tint. you know. So that in itself is hard, because back to what we were talking about earlier, when you're going through all these things like microaggressions, that then makes it harder for you to be a team player and be part of the team, because in your mind, people are saying things to you which make you feel like you're experiencing racism. And then you're like, well, I don't want to be friendly with these people because some of them aren't being nice to me. And then you're not being part of the team. But in order to really grow in any company, you need to be part of the team. So there were so many barriers that I had to overcome, really, from, to be honest with you. Unfortunately, the way I overcame some of them was just by getting used to it and just sucking it up. And that's how I moved forward in certain situations. And I don't think anyone should have to just get used to microaggressions in the workplace. I definitely feel like it was challenging for me. And I mean, yeah, we are in this day and age where some people might argue, oh, there's loads of diversity on screen now, but there isn't much diversity behind the scenes still.
So would you say then, despite the push over the last sort of few years that you've experienced, that we're not as far forward as we think we are, or we've still got a long way to go?
We're not as far forward as we think we are. And that's because of the people behind the scenes. The people making the decisions for, who presents what show and whatever. Majority of these people are not Black, or they're not, diverse, or they're not of color. And I say majority of these people aren't. So people, look, it's just like any other job. Sometimes people will hire through their vision, through what they know, through what they believe, through what they've seen. So that can sometimes hinder things. And yeah, I think you're right. I don't think we are as far ahead as people think we are. I think people think that, yeah, it's all sorted. I don't think it is sorted. I think for me, I want to see more diversity behind the screens, behind the cameras, in senior production roles, in commissioning roles, and actually in talent management roles as well. I don't think there's actually that many. I had a conversation with my friend about this. I don't think there are many Black talent agents in broadcast. And obviously, just to kind of give you some context, talent agents play a very important part for any TV presenter, radio presenter, comedian, actor, because these are the people who will have a good relationship with the channels and sell you in to hopefully get you to present the next big show and whatever. And, I've been blessed to have a really good manager who I've been with for the last couple of years, but there aren't actually many talent managers of color. And that also hinders, I think, a lot of the lack of diversity in the industry and on screen as well, because it just means that some of these agents may not understand how to sell their clients.
So, Will, we were just talking there about how we're not as far forward as we might like to think we are, or not as far forward as we might like to celebrate. As someone who's been working in the industry over the last few years, have you seen sort of events around race, like, the murder of George Floyd, the taking the knee protests, the wider conversation inspired by Black Lives Matter? Have you seen them have an influence on your career and the wider industry?
I do remember when the George Floyd incident happened. It was a pivotal moment, actually, where I think more people at work were just having conversations about racism, and more people were having uncomfortable conversations. I felt more comfortable to speak about racism on the radio. I remember doing that and feeling like, wow, like we can really have this conversation now. And I actually had this conversation with some fellow broadcasters of color the other day. And I said to myself, and we said to ourselves, we obviously, during that period, received a lot of outreach in a sense where people were reaching out to us, wanting to work with us during that period, because I think there was this need, wasn't there, for Black talent. And, some companies were literally scrambling because they realized at the moment in time, damn, we're not actually working with any Black people. And I do sometimes ask myself, would these people have reached out if George Floyd didn't happen? Would they have, wanted to work with me, or would they have reached out if George Floyd didn't happen? And I look back on the whole situation now and actually think to myself, I think things are going back to normal pre-George Floyd, because I think during that period, it was very much like, right, we need Black talent, we need this, we need this, we need this, we need this. And it was like, wow, oh my gosh, this change is happening. It felt like a bit more of a level playing field for everyone, where it felt like we're not just the token one Black person on a show. There are a bit more of us now, but actually everyone's included. That's how it felt like at the time. But it definitely feels like we're in a place where it's kind of slowly creeping back to the way it was before.
And recognizing that, then, how would you hope to sort of sustain this momentum? How would you like to keep more Black voices in the conversation? And how do you think is the best way to make sure that there's, more Black talent on the screen, or more Black talent behind the scenes?
Yeah. Look, I just don't think it should have taken, an innocent Black man to have been killed in the States for there to be this big conversation about the need for Black talent and the need for diversity. It should not have taken that. And I just feel like now we need to be at a place where there is a genuine need for Black talent, not just because people feel like it needs to be done, but because they want to. That's what needs to happen, really. It shouldn't just be this, it shouldn't be a tokenistic thing where people are just trying to tick boxes. I think we should work to get to a place where Black talent is wanted and nurtured and cherished naturally, not just to tick a box.
And so just as a final couple of questions then, just thinking about what you've said about diversity in the industry that you're in at the moment, what advice would you give to a kind of, a young adult of colour, someone who's going through college, someone who's going through university and looking to get on the same pathway that you're on?
I would say to them, keep working hard and don't feel like you need to take the easy way out. Basically, I think we're in this day and age, people just feel like, right, I'm looking at social media and I'm seeing all these people with loads of followers and they are just living their best life. So I'm now going to just, I don't know, post pictures and just become an influencer. I would say that if you want to get into journalism or presenting, just keep going on, doing what you're doing, go through the path, get the work experience. It's all about the craft. It's all about learning those skills. Because, if I, at a very young age, well, if I, all those years ago, when people were discouraging me, just said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to build up a social media account to be an influencer and just hope I get picked because, people might think I'm famous from being an influencer. Then how would I have had the skills that I have now? Believe in yourself, believe in your skills and believe in the process and just keep on going.
Thank you to my guest, Will Njobvu, and to you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and that it's got you thinking about the connections between race, diversity, education, and wider society. You can keep up to date with the podcast on social media, follow us on Twitter @Skills Edu Group, or search Skills and Education Group on LinkedIn and Facebook. Do remember to subscribe wherever you receive your podcasts, and let's go further together.